I am with our State Senator Bruce Tarr, who has been super busy. This is Friday, July 22nd, and Thursday, July 21st was a big day in the Senate. But let's start earlier in the week with the budget, the 2023 budget. You came to some agreements last Monday. Do you want to talk about that?
Well, absolutely, Heather, and it's great to see you. It's been a while since we've been able to talk on camera, but it's great to be back with you and on a particularly hot day on Cape Ann. So it's good that we're both in the shade.
It's really hot, yeah.
But it's also been very hot on Beacon Hill because there's been a lot going on, and something very significant happened on Monday, and that is that both the House and the Senate accepted the conference committee report on the fiscal year 2023 budget. And the document that ultimately was agreed upon spends $52.7 billion. So it's a very expensive budget. And in fact, the amount of the budget is actually more than when it had left the Senate. And that's because of a change in our revenue estimate. We continue to take in revenue that's exceeding our projections. And so as a result of that, the conference committee had to adjust and spend some of those resources in the budget. When we were debating it in the Senate, it was about a $50 billion budget, so it actually went up a considerable amount. But I'm really pleased we have an agreement. I think, as we've talked about in the past, the fiscal year starts on July 1st, so we're late, but not terribly late. And in Massachusetts, unlike in Washington, we never really have the threat of a shutdown or anything of that nature because we pass interim budgets. And that's what happened in this case, to give us the breathing room to finish work on this budget. But just a couple of notable things in the budget. Number one, it provides a significant increase to local aid, which helps our cities and towns, particularly as they're dealing with the cost of inflation. The second thing that's important for a lot of school districts in our region is it doubles the amount for minimum per pupil aid. It had been $30, it goes to $60. And something that is important to the Manchester-Essex Regional School District is that it carries a number of 85% for regional transportation reimbursement. And that's pretty significant. It should be 100%. And I argued strenuously for that because that's what the statute says. But this is a high watermark in many ways, and we're happy about that. So this is a budget that invests a lot of money in different areas and different priorities. One of the things I'm happiest about in the budget, in addition to what I just told you, is the focus on mental health. And we have been hearing, particularly from educators all throughout the region and all across the state, that there are more and more mental health issues that the schools are having to deal with. And so this budget creates a fund, a grant program of $6 million to get started. Again, it's going to need to be larger, but the idea is to help local school districts deal with mental health issues and issues of social emotional learning. So this is a budget I'm really pleased with. And the one thing that I was disappointed about when we debated the budget and passed the budget, and I was very vocal about this, is that it did not include any significant tax relief. But we can talk about that in a different light now because of the passage of the Economic Development Bill.
Well, before we get to that, there are a couple of nice little local pieces in this budget. One is for our lobstermen, and two is maybe a conversation about a community wastewater treatment plant, right?
Absolutely, and I'm really pleased that we were able to get final passage on the grant program for our lobstermen. As we all know, the burden of protecting the right whales is falling heavily, if not exclusively, on the shoulders of our lobstermen because they have to adapt. They're losing months out of the year when they can't fish, and they have to use new gear, which is very costly to acquire, particularly when you've lost 4 or 5 months of being able to fish, which was the case between February and May. So I was able to get into the budget a $500,000 grant program. It's limited to $5,000 per recipient to be able to help our lobstermen and women be able to buy this new gear. And the thrust behind the gear is that it's so-called weak gear. So if you're using rope, it's rope that breaks at a certain tension so that a whale that gets entangled could escape. And there's another way of doing that, which is using links that can break so that the rope again, has the ability to separate so that a whale can free themselves if they happen to get caught in it. These are good ideas for protecting the whales, but we also have to protect the lobster fishery. And this grant program will go a long way toward doing that.
Well, let's jump to the economic development bill that was passed yesterday in the Senate. And there is some nice something you've been fighting for a long time, right? The tax relief, but you can talk about anything you want about this bill.
Well, before I get to the tax issue,
Yeah.
I just want to point out a couple of things that are in that bill that I think are very significant. We were able to put a spending authorization in the bill, in the bonding section of the bill, to upgrade the working waterfront in Gloucester, whether that be wastewater treatment or water or electrical upgrades. That's very significant. Something else that's very significant that is just becoming something that people are aware of, and that is that fire chiefs in Essex County are trying to put together a training facility. Right now, they train either locally at the station, but ultimately they have to go to Stowe, Massachusetts, which is a good distance away. They would like to have a local facility in our region. And they've been working very hard on this, the Essex County Fire Chiefs Association. They approached us at a breakfast, our legislative delegation, a couple of months ago. They pitched the idea. And I was able to secure in the economic development bill $1.4 million to plan and design what that building would look like. Now, it's going to cost a lot more than that to construct it, but this will get us moving in the right direction, being able to design it, determine what it needs to look like, where it needs to be, a lot of the details. So I'm very, very happy about that as well.
Is this the kind of building that they would practice putting out fires in?
Yes.
Oh, huh.
Yes.
That's pretty interesting because we do know that around here, every once in a while, there's a home that needs to come down and the firemen are allowed to practice, but they don't get that too much, right?
They don't, and the training needs to be regular and it needs to be consistent. And I've actually had the experience of training with the Ipswich Fire Department and being in the burn building out in Stowe. And it is a very interesting feeling when you're in that building and the doors get shut and the fire gets lit. And it really teaches you that you have a couple of things that you can depend on. Number one are your colleagues. Number two is your training. And number three is your gear. And it really drives home the point that when you're in that environment, all of those things come into play. So hopefully soon in our part of the state, we'll have our own training facility, not to replace Stowe, but to be complementary to what happens in Stowe. So I'm very happy about that. In addition to that, we have some bond authorization in this bill for a very exciting project that's taking shape in Manchester by the Sea, where cell signaling technology, which currently has its headquarters on 128 at the former King's Grant, which you and I would remember, maybe some others wouldn't. But they're looking to build a new facility in Manchester by the Sea. And in order to do that, there's a tremendous requirement to increase the power supply on the North Shore, the electric supply. So we have a $5 million authorization in the bill for bonding to be able to help do those upgrades, which will not only help the cell signaling project, but will help all of us in terms of the reliability of power delivery and transmission in the region. So those are some pretty exciting things. But the most important thing, perhaps, Heather, is in fact that we finally are able to put into a bill significant tax relief for citizens in Massachusetts. This has been something that the governor had proposed back in January, and that I and my colleagues in the Senate Republican caucus, and for that matter, the House Republican caucus, have been championing. But I would say it's also been a bipartisan effort. We have not been the only ones suggesting that we need to do this. We have had support, consistent support, from a number of members of the majority party in the Senate who have joined with us on a number of different initiatives. So I wouldn't want to portray this as sort of a monodimensional situation. There's been a coalition working on this, but we had not gotten the agreement of the Democratic leadership, and now we have. And so there's significant relief in this budget, depending on how you count it. It will be somewhere between $500 and $600 million of tax relief for citizens in the Commonwealth. And the reason that that's a bit of a moving target is because it depends on what you count, because there's also the issue of rebate checks that are included in this package. $250 for a single filer, $500 for joint filers. I don't necessarily count that as tax relief. Some people do, and that's why the number is different. But this package has some terrific things in it, including an increase in the senior citizen circuit breaker program, which is something that gives you relief for property taxes and utilities that exceed 10% of your income. And importantly, It's not just for folks that own a home, it's also for renters, because there's a way to calculate how much of rent is attributable to taxes and utilities. So it's a wonderful thing there. There's an increase in the dependent care deduction. So families that have kids, that deduction would go up under this plan. There are a number of different things targeted at folks who are of lower income. And one is the earned income tax credit. Right now, we link our tax credit to the federal earned income tax credit. And currently, we allow 30% of the federal credit to also be taken at the state level. This bill would go to 40%. So there are some very important things. And I'll be the first to tell you, I'm thrilled that we are finally able to do this. I think we could have done more. In fact, I had that discussion on the floor of the Senate last night. But we did agree, both the chair of Ways and Means, Senator Mike Roderick's a good friend from Westport, and we did agree that this was a good effort. It was a bipartisan effort, and we're finally going to see something that I think many of us have understood needed to happen for quite a while, given the fact that the Mass Taxpayers Foundation indicated that we're going to finish this year with a $3.66 billion surplus, meaning revenue over what we need to operate state government and pay for the budget that we've approved.
That's amazing, really amazing. Well, kudos to you there, because I know the last time we spoke, this was all on the table and you were frustrated that you weren't seeing the effort happening. So that's great. Yeah.
Well, thanks. It's truly an issue of persistence. And I had put up on my social media a clock counting down the days left to be able to get this done. And as we've talked about in the past, the legislative session, the formal legislative session, ends on July 31st, next Sunday. Mm-hmm. So we didn't have much time to get this done. And of course, now it goes to the, well, first it has to go to a conference committee because there are differences between the House and Senate versions of the bill. Mm-hmm. But these tax provisions are not different. They've already been agreed to by the House and the Senate. But the details still have to be worked out, and we still have to get it to the governor. So the clock is ticking, but we took a huge step forward with the adoption of this bill.
Well, just to try to ask how the sausage gets made a little bit, how did the movement happen? Because it really looked like there was no budging on this from the majority party. So what do you think happened? Or maybe you can say exactly what happened.
Well, I can tell you what I think happened generally. And generally, there was a lot of persistence. We continued to offer amendments at every opportunity. We continue to talk about this issue with every opportunity. Governor Baker was very vocal about the need to do this. And I think eventually we brought this into focus, and the folks in majority party leadership realized that this was something we had to do. But it took a long time, and it took a sustained effort. And it also involved the citizens of Massachusetts, who were also saying in emails and phone calls and letters that I was seeing, this is something that we need to do. Mm-hmm. And, you know, one of the things that was important is we needed to do this not in a token way for a very small amount of money. We needed to do this in a substantial way. And everything other than the rebate checks that I mentioned to you is permanent. So these are permanent changes to the tax code. And I think they're going to serve us well. And one of the reasons they're going to serve us well is not only because folks deserve this kind of relief, but we're also dealing with tremendous challenges to household budgets in terms of the cost of inflation, the cost of fuel. And we could be headed into an uncertain time in terms of our economy. So we need to make household finances as strong as they possibly can be. And these tax programs will go a long way toward doing that. And I think all of those things combined to crystallize the idea in the mind of the Senate President and the Speaker, who I talked about this on a regular basis, that we finally needed to do this. And now we're very close to having it onto the desk of the governor. I feel fairly confident that the governor will sign these provisions if they get to his desk.
That's great. Well, yesterday, there were also two bills that kind of sneaked out of conference committee. Can I say that? One was the climate change, clean energy and climate change bill, which there was a lot of conversation about last winter. So let's sum that up. What are we going to get when we have this bill?
So I'm very pleased that we're actually able to get the bill done. It is something that has been being talked about for a while. It's been in conference committee for a while. This is one of those conference committees that I felt so strongly about that I appointed myself to it. So I sat with the other 5 conferees, and we worked to hammer out an agreement. And truthfully, Heather, there were many that thought that wasn't going to be possible because the House bill was so different than the Senate bill. But the focus for me was always on making sure that if we're going to increase load and increase demand for electricity, that we also think about how we're going to supply that electricity and how we're going to deliver it to consumers and businesses. And I'm pleased that we got some important provisions in this bill that provide, for instance, some manufacturing incentives for people to make the technology for offshore wind in Massachusetts, as opposed to making it abroad and importing it here. There are also very important workforce training provisions in this bill. And there's a very important couple of study groups and commissions that are going to look at transmission and how we're going to make sure that we successfully deliver the increased electricity that we're going to need as we continue to put a focus on increased electrification, not only with space conditioning in buildings, so trying to move away from gas and move more toward things like air source heat pumps, but also as we move toward the electrification of our transportation infrastructure. And there's a lot of language in this bill about what we're going to do in terms of electrification of bus fleets. There's also something in the bill, in the economic development bill about that. But you can't be just focused on demand. You have to be focused on supply as well. And for me, that was the bottom line. And I'm really pleased that we got this done so that we can start to plan more source and more transmission. And then along the way, hopefully get some economic development around this industry advancing even further.
So this goes to the governor's desk now?
It will go to the governor's desk, and it is not beyond the realm of possibility that he may send it back with some suggestions. He may not sign it as presented to him, and that could present another challenge for the legislature in terms of what we do with those suggestions, but it's too early to tell right now.
All right. Didn't he really like this bill last winter?
He likes the idea. He knows we need to do it, but again, the devil is always in the details.
Yeah.
And we took something that folks could easily understand what was in the House bill. They could easily understand what was in the Senate bill. And now we've got a hybrid creation that he really needs to think about carefully and look at carefully. And there are some items in the bill that are controversial. One of them would allow 10 communities in Massachusetts to be able to, through their zoning code, require any new construction to only use electricity in terms of space conditioning. Now, that was changed. That was originally in the Senate bill, but it was qualified in the conference committee report to say that that could only happen in communities, for instance, that have met their requirement for affordable housing under Chapter 40B. Because the thought was that if you just had this requirement, it would only benefit wealthy communities and communities that had a more stratified or broad-based socioeconomic population, they wouldn't participate. So it was considered to be sort of an elitist provision. So that got modified to say, no, you have to be doing your part for affordable housing to be able to do this pilot program to see how it's going to work. That is still a controversial idea. So we'll see what winds up happening. But like with every conference committee report, for all of us, we have to weigh the good and the bad and try to make a decision. Is what's good in the bill worth more than what's bad in the bill? And is it worth moving forward? So those were hard decisions for a lot of people.
Well, I know you have to go talk to my good friend Rick Moore next. So say hi to him for me. And
be happy to.
Okay. And I hope we catch you next week too.
I hope so too. Last week is really, I refer to these 2 weeks as being the red zone of the legislative session. We're really getting close to the end. And so next week will be the final week in the formal legislative session. But I hope we can find some time to chat because there'll be a lot of exciting things happening.
I'm sure. And then you'll be on your farm relaxing and drinking lemonade and all that kind of stuff.
Maybe for a little while.
All right. We will see you as soon as we can.
Absolutely. Thanks, Heather.
Thank you.
Interested in a sponsorship? Email sponsor@1623studios.org to learn more.